Ancient swords could slice through stone, and shields repelled the fiercest blows. These legendary weapons were not myths, but real artifacts forged with lost metallurgical secrets. Civilizations like the Romans and Damascus steelmakers achieved feats that modern science still struggles to replicate. By the end of this journey, you will understand the forgotten arts that created history's most indestructible arms. How did a simple blend of metals produce a blade that never dulled? Why did the formula for a concrete that lasts millennia vanish? What does it truly mean to master a material? The answers reveal a sophistication we are only beginning to grasp. What do you believe was the greatest secret our ancestors knew about the world around them? The rhythmic clang of a hammer echoes from a simple workshop, a sound that would change the world. A lone smith, face glowing in the forge's heat, is not just shaping metal. He is conducting the first experiments in a new science. By combining soft copper with a rarer element, tin, he creates something entirely new. This is bronze, the world's first great alloy, a material harder and more durable than any that came before. This was not a sudden invention but a slow, deliberate discovery born from countless trials. Early metalworkers were the first chemists, learning to read the colors of flames and the textures of slag. They discovered that certain rocks, when heated in a charcoal fire, would yield a glowing, liquid metal. Controlling that fire was everything. The earliest furnaces were little more than pits in the ground, but they were the crucibles of civilization. Through patient observation, these innovators realized that adding a specific stone, cassiterite, to molten copper produced a stronger material perfect for casting axes, shields, and swords. This knowledge did not stay in one place. It traveled along dusty trade routes from the workshops of Mesopotamia to the forges of the Indus Valley. Each culture added its own refinement. Centuries later, the Hittites of Anatolia would push this art even further. They mastered the far more difficult process of smelting iron, a metal that required immensely hotter temperatures to work. Their control over iron weaponry did not just give them better tools, it forged an empire, proving that the secrets of metal were directly tied to the rise and fall of nations. What relentless curiosity drove these ancient minds to experiment for generations? They worked without textbooks, without a periodic table, guided only by the evidence of their senses and a determination to improve their world. This foundational era of fire and ore set the stage for the even more astonishing metallurgical secrets that were still to come. That Roman armorer knew a truth we often forget. He was not just mixing metals, he was composing a symphony of strength, and every ingredient had a purpose. The first great secret of ancient metallurgy was not a single recipe but a profound understanding of alloy composition. It was the art of blending different elements to create a material greater than the sum of its parts. The Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder wrote extensively about this, noting that the finest iron did not come from just anywhere. He described specific mines in Noricum, a region in the Alps whose ore was prized above all others for its inherent purity and the presence of beneficial trace elements. Ancient smiths sought out these special ores because they understood, on an intuitive level, that the land itself imbued the metal with unique characteristics. The core of this art was the marriage of iron and carbon. By introducing just the right amount of carbon into molten iron, they created steel, but the margin for error was incredibly slim. Too little carbon and the metal remained soft and malleable, a poor choice for a blade. Too much carbon and the steel became as hard as glass, shattering on impact instead of bending. The perfect balance produced a sword that was both hard enough to hold a razor edge and flexible enough to absorb the shock of combat without breaking. This principle applied to earlier metals as well. Consider the Greek bronze helmet. It was not made from simple copper and tin. Analysis of surviving artifacts shows they often included small, deliberate amounts of arsenic or lead. These were not impurities. They were additives that altered the bronze behavior, making it easier to cast into the intricate, life-saving shapes of a Corinthian helmet and increasing its resistance to the corrosive touch of seawater and sweat. A weapon's life could depend on a fraction of a percent of an unknown element. A tiny amount of phosphorus from a particular ore could make the metal brittle, dooming a warrior. Conversely, a trace of vanadium could create microscopic structures that acted as an internal skeleton, granting legendary toughness. Is it not astonishing that these masters of the forge, working without microscopes or chemical assays, learn to control these invisible variables? They read the metal like a living thing, judging its quality by the color of its glow and the sound it made when struck. This deep material wisdom allowed them to forge artifacts that endured for millennia, setting the stage for the next incredible secret, the transformative power of the forge itself. The true magic happened not in the mixing but in the fire. After an alloy was perfectly composed, it was the master smith's control over heat that gave it a soul. This second great secret, the art of heat treatment, transformed a well-made piece of steel into a living, breathing weapon. It was a delicate dance of heating and cooling, a process where a single misstep could shatter months of work. The most dramatic step was quenching, the act of heating the red-hot steel to a critical temperature and then plunging it into a cooling liquid, often water or oil. This rapid cooling locked the metal's crystalline structure into an incredibly hard state, perfect for holding a sharp edge, but this hardness came at a cost. The metal was now as brittle as crystal, ready to fracture under stress. Ancient smiths from the Celtic tribes to the workshops of Syria developed brilliant solutions to this problem. They learned that by immediately reheating the quenched blade to a much lower temperature, a process called tempering, they could carefully trade a small amount of that extreme hardness for a great deal of toughness and flexibility. This balance was everything. A sword that was too hard would break in battle, while one that was too soft would bend and never cut true. The smiths judged these critical temperatures not with digital readouts, but by reading the colors of the steel itself. As the metal heated, it would develop a thin oxide layer that changed color with the temperature. A pale straw color indicated a perfect temper for a razor's edge, while a deep blue might be used for a spring, offering more flexibility. This color spectrum was their thermometer, a visual language of heat that they learned to interpret with uncanny precision. Some cultures took this even further. The legendary Japanese katana makers perfected a technique known as differential hardening. They would coat the spine of the blade in a thick layer of clay before quenching. The edge left exposed would cool rapidly and become glass-hard. The clay-insulated spine, cooling slowly, remained soft and flexible. This created a sword with a deadly, sharp edge married to a resilient body that could absorb tremendous impact without breaking. It was a single object with two distinct material personalities, a masterpiece of thermal engineering. Modern metallurgists confirm that these processes fundamentally altered the metal's grain structure, creating microscopic features that acted like a built-in defense system against cracks and deformation. What if our most advanced manufacturing today applied this same reverence for the material's inner life? This deep, hands-on knowledge of how heat shapes metal was a monumental achievement. Yet, even the most perfectly treated blade was not complete. Its final legendary qualities were unlocked by the hammer in the secret third act of its creation. The hammer's final blow did not simply shape the blade, it gave it a hidden internal architecture. This third secret, the art of innovative forging, turned solid metal into a composite material of astonishing resilience. While heat treatment gave steel its soul, it was the physical act of forging that built its skeleton. The most famous example is the shimmering pattern of Damascus steel. That beautiful, wavy surface was not merely decorative, it was the visible record of a profound manufacturing process. The smith would take multiple layers of different steel types, each with varying carbon content, and heat, fold, and hammer weld them together into a solid billet. This process was repeated dozens, sometimes hundreds of times, creating a microscopic structure akin to plywood. The alternating hard and soft layers created a blade that was both exceptionally sharp and remarkably shatter-proof. When the sword was struck, a crack propagating from the hard edge would be stopped dead when it reached the softer, more flexible layer beside it. This internal structure distributed stress throughout the entire weapon, preventing the catastrophic failures that could end a warrior's life. This principle of combining materials was not unique to the Middle East. In the smoky forges of the Viking North, smiths practiced a technique called pattern welding. They would twist together rods of iron and high-carbon steel, then hammer them into a solid core for their legendary swords. A historical account from the period describes how these twisted rods, when forged together, created a sword with a serpentine pattern and the heart of a dragon. The resulting blade was not a single, homogeneous piece of metal, but a sophisticated laminate. The softer iron provided a flexible, shock-absorbing core, while the steel edges provided the lethal cutting power. This intelligent design meant a Viking sword could parry a heavy axe blow without snapping, a common failure in simpler weapons. The mechanics behind this were all about grain alignment. Each strike of the hammer compressed the microscopic crystals within the metal, pushing out impurities and aligning the grain structure in the direction of the force. Think of it like the grain in a piece of wood. It is far stronger along its length than across it. A master smith, through years of practice, learned to hammer the metal in such a way as to orient this grain along the entire length of the blade, following its contours. This created a continuous path of strength, much like the strands in a rope. The anvil was his partner in this dance, its specific shapes and edges allowing him to skillfully direct the metal's flow. In Moorish Spain, this knowledge reached a pinnacle. Their layered steel swords, known as toldano blades, were so flexible they could be bent into a semicircle and spring back to true. On the battlefield, this was a terrifying advantage, a weapon that would not break when most needed. How did they achieve such flawless consistency without a single precision machine? It was a mastery born of touch and sight, a deep, intuitive understanding of material behavior passed down through generations. The rhythm of their hammers was a language, and they were speaking directly to the metal's very structure. But even the most skilled hands were limited by the raw materials they could acquire, forcing them to seek out the Earth's most extraordinary gifts. The quality of a legendary sword was forged not just in the fire, but in the earth itself. Hidden within certain mountainsides were rare deposits of ore, the raw material that held the potential for greatness. Ancient metallurgists did not treat all iron ore as equal. They became geological connoisseurs, seeking out specific mines whose rock contained the perfect alchemy of trace elements to produce a superior metal. The Roman legionary's gladius was often made from Noric steel, a material so famed for its strength that it was mentioned by writers of the era. This steel came from a specific region in the Alps, where the iron ore naturally contained just the right impurities. Modern analysis shows that ores from such locations contain tiny amounts of elements like vanadium and nickel. These were not contaminants but essential ingredients. Vanadium, for instance, forms incredibly hard, tiny particles within the steel matrix that act like microscopic anvils, resisting wear and preventing the blade from dulling. Nickel, on the other hand, adds a remarkable toughness, allowing the metal to bend rather than break under stress. Acquiring this special ore required immense effort. Miners would follow surface veins deep into the earth, using fire setting to fracture the hard rock. They would heat the stone with fires and then douse it with cold water, causing it to crack so they could break it away with stone hammers and bronze picks. This was dangerous, backbreaking work, all for the chance to extract a few baskets of the precious rock. Once mined, the ore was smelted in a bloomery furnace, a clay or stone stack filled with alternating layers of charcoal and crushed ore. The burning charcoal created carbon monoxide, which stripped the oxygen from the iron ore, leaving behind a spongy mass of iron mixed with slag called a bloom. The skill here was in controlling the furnace atmosphere to ensure the metal absorbed just the right amount of carbon from the fuel, all while the trace elements from the ore performed their hidden work. The most famous case is the legendary Wootz steel from India. This was not just any iron, it was a hypereutectoid steel, a term that simply means it had a very high, uniform carbon content. This unique structure originated from iron ore mined in specific locations in southern India, which contained trace amounts of vanadium and other elements. When this particular ore was smelted in a sealed clay crucible with specific types of carbon-rich leaves, it produced a steel ingot with a characteristic crystalline pattern. It was these raw ingots, traded along ancient routes to Damascus, that Syrian smiths would then forge into the legendary blades with their watery patterns. The ore from that one region, processed in that one specific way, was the essential first ingredient that made the miracle possible. The entire known world was scoured for these precious resources. Vast trade networks stretched across deserts and seas, connecting Celtic tin mines in Britain to bronze foundries in Greece, and funneling Scandinavian bog iron to workshops throughout Europe. The value of a metal was intrinsically linked to the distant, almost mythical source of its ore. What did these ancient miners and smelters sense in the land that we have since forgotten? They understood that the mountain itself was a partner in the craft, that the spirit of the metal was shaped by the place of its birth. This deep, almost sacred connection to the material world infused their work with a meaning that went far beyond the practical. A sword's spirit was forged not only in fire and ore, but in the solemn silence of ritual. The fifth secret of ancient metallurgy reveals a world where craft was inseparable from ceremony, where the smith was both engineer and priest. He performed specific rites to invoke divine favor, believing that spiritual forces could be channeled directly into the metal. For the Norse smith, this meant inscribing runes like Tyr was, the symbol of the god Tyr, onto a blade's surface. This was not mere decoration. It was a literal invocation for victory and protection, a prayer hammered into the steel itself. Anthropologists note that these practices provided immense psychological assurance to the warrior who wielded the weapon, forging a bond of trust between the man and his sword that was as crucial as the metal's physical properties. They also cemented the smith's revered status within the community, transforming a technical process into a sacred event that reinforced social cohesion. The symbolism often extended to the very materials used. Throwing animal bones into the smelting furnace was a common practice across many cultures. On a spiritual level, this was an offering to the gods of the forge. On a practical, material level, the bones were a source of carbon, actively altering the chemistry of the iron to create a stronger steel. The spiritual and the scientific were two sides of the same coin, utterly intertwined. Nowhere was this fusion more elaborate than in ancient China. The casting of monumental bronze vessels for royal rituals was a state-sponsored endeavor of the highest importance. Before the molten metal was ever poured, court diviners would perform ceremonies to consult the ancestors and ensure their approval. The vessels themselves, used for offerings to the spirits, were covered in intricate designs depicting the natural and supernatural worlds. The flawless casting of these objects was paramount, as a single flaw was seen as an ill omen, a crack in the connection to the divine. This immense cultural pressure drove the metallurgists to achieve a perfection in their craft that was both an artistic and a spiritual imperative. So, did these rites actually influence the metal's quality? In a very real sense, yes. The intense focus, the unwavering belief, and the ritualized, repetitive actions required by these ceremonies created a state of hyper-awareness in the smith. This mindful focus eliminated careless errors and fostered a deep, intuitive connection to the process, allowing him to read the subtlest signs in the fire and metal. The ritual was a technology of the mind, honing the craftsman's skill to its absolute peak. This sacred dimension of the craft, where faith and physics met at the anvil, required one final element to achieve its full expression: the specialized tools that were themselves considered sacred objects. The tools and furnaces of the master smith were as carefully engineered as the weapons they produced. This sixth secret, advanced tool and furnace design, reveals a world of sophisticated thermal engineering that allowed ancient metallurgists to command temperatures and processes we would find challenging even today. In ancient India, smiths constructed towering furnaces made from special refractory clays, materials resistant to extreme heat. These structures were not simple fire pits. They were carefully designed stacks that created a powerful natural draft, pulling air upwards to fuel the combustion. Teams of workers operated massive leather bellows, forcing air through ceramic nozzles known as tires. These nozzles were not just simple pipes. They were designed to direct the air blast precisely where it was needed, creating a vortex of heat that ensured even distribution and maximum temperature within the furnace chamber. This precise control was the difference between a lump of impure slag and a workable bloom of high-quality iron. This principle of controlled airflow was refined across the globe. In Europe, the Catalan forge represented a monumental leap forward. It used a clever design with two chambers, one for the fire and another for preheating the air. This recycling of thermal energy meant less charcoal was consumed while achieving higher, more consistent temperatures. The efficiency was staggering, allowing for the continuous production of iron on a scale previously unimaginable. Engineering historians point out that the shape and angle of the tires in such forges were critical. They had to introduce the air without cooling the molten metal, a delicate balance that required deep empirical knowledge of fluid dynamics and heat transfer. These smiths were mastering the principles of chemistry and physics through the language of clay, stone, and fire. Beyond the furnaces, a whole ecosystem of specialized tools made the impossible possible. Heavy, articulated tongs allowed the smith to hold a glowing billet of steel without burning his hands. Stone and clay molds enabled the precise casting of intricate objects, from bronze statues to gold jewelry. But one of the most revolutionary inventions was the Roman water-powered trip hammer. By harnessing the relentless power of a water wheel, these automated forges could deliver a continuous, powerful hammering force that no human arm could match. This mechanization did more than just save labor. It created a new standard of consistency. Every blow was identical, allowing for the mass production of tools and weapons with a uniformity that was crucial for equipping a vast imperial army. How did these designs evolve without the benefit of modern technology? They were the product of generations of incremental improvement, each smith adding a small refinement, a slightly better clay mixture, a more efficient bellow design passed down from master to apprentice. This mastery of equipment was the physical proof of their chemical knowledge, a tangible understanding of how to manipulate the material world. With such powerful tools at their command, the ancient masters were poised to create objects of such perfection that their secrets would be lost for centuries. A master smith would sometimes toss a handful of crushed animal bones into the roaring furnace. This was not a random act of superstition, but a deliberate application of the seventh secret, the strategic incorporation of natural additives. These organic and mineral substances, introduced during smelting or forging, acted as a form of ancient chemistry, fundamentally altering the metal's properties in ways that pure alloying could not achieve. The rationale was both practical and profound. Bones are rich in calcium phosphate and carbon. When added to the smelting process, they served as a powerful flux agent. A flux is a material that causes impurities within the ore, known as slag, to become more fluid and separate easily from the pure metal. The bones effectively scrubbed the iron clean, creating a higher quality bloom with fewer imperfections. But their role did not end there. The intense heat would also release carbon from the bones, which was then absorbed by the iron, transforming it into a stronger, harder steel. This single, simple additive performed a dual function, cleansing and strengthening the metal in one step. Seashells, rich in calcium carbonate, were used in a similar manner, their chemical composition helping to create a protective slag that shielded the molten metal from the oxygen in the air, preventing it from becoming brittle. This knowledge was carefully recorded in later periods. Theophilus, a 12th century monk and master craftsman, wrote detailed manuscripts describing recipes for metalworking. He prescribed specific mixtures involving herbs and wood ashes for surface treatments, creating finishes that protected the metal from the relentless attack of rust and corrosion. Centuries earlier, Celtic swordmakers had mastered this art. They would treat their blades with plant-based compounds, often derived from bog iron or certain acidic saps. This process created a stable, protective patina on the surface of the sword, a thin layer that acted as a shield against the elements. This was not just about keeping a blade shiny, it was about prolonging its functional life, ensuring that a warrior's most vital tool would not succumb to rot during a long campaign or a damp winter. The Celts understood that a sword lost to corrosion was as useless as one broken in battle. Beyond plants and bones, smiths experimented with a whole apothecary of Earth's offerings. Certain sands were added to crucibles to create a glassy slag that protected the steel. Other minerals provided specific trace elements, like manganese, which could enhance hardenability. They were, in effect, the first materials scientists experimenting with the periodic table of the natural world. They asked a question we are still grappling with today. What other natural resources, hidden in plain sight, hold untapped potential for creating stronger, more resilient materials? Their work demonstrates a brilliant proto-chemistry, an intuitive grasp of molecular interactions long before the concepts of atoms or elements were formally defined. This clever manipulation of nature's bounty required more than just a list of ingredients. It demanded a deep, systematic understanding that could only be preserved through one method: the rigorous and secretive training of an apprentice. A master's knowledge was a treasure more carefully guarded than any chest of gold. The eighth and perhaps most vital secret of ancient metallurgy was not written in any book, but lived in the hands and minds of apprentices, passed down through a sacred system of mentorship. Picture a boy of 12 entering a master smith's workshop for the first time. His initial years were not spent anywhere near the forge. He would sweep the floors, clean the tools, and tend the charcoal fire, absorbing the rhythms and smells of the craft through sheer immersion. This was the foundation of the guild system, a structure designed not just to teach skills but to mold a person, instilling patience, discipline, and an unwavering respect for the tradition. Historical sociologists note that this intimate, long-term relationship was the engine of both preservation and innovation. A master could observe a pupil's innate talent and judgment, tailoring the transmission of knowledge to the individual. The apprentice learned not just the how but the why, understanding the subtle feel of the metal, the sound of the perfect hammer strike, and the intuitive timing that no manual could ever capture. The process was one of gradual unveiling. After years of menial tasks, the apprentice might be trusted to work the bellows, learning to read the fire's breath. Later, he would be allowed to heat a piece of metal, judged on his ability to bring it to the exact color demanded by the master. Only after a decade or more of proven loyalty and skill would the deepest secrets be shared, the precise recipes for fluxes, the mystical temperatures for quenching specific steels, and the hidden patterns of folding that created a legendary blade. This slow, personal approach stood in stark contrast to modern, standardized education. It was knowledge earned through experience, etched into muscle memory as deeply as into the mind. Nowhere was this more evident than in the sword-making families of Japan. In workshops like those of the famed Gassen school, fathers taught sons a craft that was considered a spiritual calling. The creation of a katana was a ceremony in itself, with each step governed by ritual and silence. The son would watch for years before ever being permitted to hold the hammer in a meaningful way. He learned that polishing the blade was not a chore but a meditation, revealing the soul of the steel. This generational continuity ensured that quality standards remained impossibly high for centuries, as the family's reputation and honor were forged into every weapon they produced. The initiation rites for a journeyman, marking his transition from apprentice to qualified craftsman, were solemn affairs. He might be required to produce a masterpiece, a piece that demonstrated his mastery of every technique he had learned, judged by a council of masters. This was his gateway into the closed world of the guild, an organization that controlled wages, protected trade secrets, and maintained a monopoly on quality. The human bond between teacher and student was the fragile thread that kept entire technologies from disappearing. It was a living library where the books were people and the reading took a lifetime. This intricate web of knowledge, however, could not exist in a vacuum. It required a powerful and sustained economic engine to fuel its fires, an engine built on the demands of empire and the flow of international trade. A master smith's workshop did not exist in isolation, but was deeply connected to a vast, humming network of global commerce. The ninth secret of ancient metallurgy reveals that economic forces and sprawling trade routes were just as crucial as fire and hammer in the evolution of legendary weapons. Bustling ports and caravan stops became melting pots where technological secrets were exchanged as freely as the ingots and finished blades being traded. The Phoenicians, master sailors of the ancient Mediterranean, did not just transport Lebanese cedar and Tyrian purple, they carried tin from Cornwall to the bronze-hungry workshops of Egypt and Mesopotamia. With every trade agreement and every ship that sailed, a piece of metallurgical knowledge traveled with it, a subtle transfer of technique that could revolutionize an entire region's military power. This relentless demand for superior arms created the world's first research and development budgets. Kings and generals funded specialized forges, offering immense rewards to smiths who could produce a stronger sword or a more resilient coat of mail. This economic incentive drove specialization and innovation at a pace never before seen. As one historian of ancient economics notes, the arms race was the primary engine of technological progress, channeling vast resources into the relentless pursuit of a material advantage. The Silk Road stands as the ultimate example of this phenomenon. This was not merely a route for silk and spices, it was a highway for high technology. The secret of producing ultra-high carbon Wootz steel ingots in southern India traveled along these dusty trails, reaching the forges of Damascus and Persia. There, local smiths applied their own sophisticated folding techniques to these exotic raw materials, creating the famed Damascus blades that became legendary across continents. This cross-pollination of ideas, fueled by commerce, produced a hybrid technology far superior to what any single culture could have developed alone. Resource scarcity often acted as a brutal but effective innovator. When tin for bronze became scarce in the eastern Mediterranean around 1200 BCE, metal workers were forced to adapt. They began to improve iron smelting techniques out of sheer necessity, gradually unlocking the potential of a metal that was far more common but infinitely more difficult to master. This economic pressure catalyzed the transition from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age, forever changing the course of history. Even luxury markets played a role. The demand for exquisite gold and silver work for royalty and temples drove advances in fine casting, soldering, and metal purification. These refined techniques, developed for decorative arts, often found critical applications in the precise crafting of weapon hilts, armor fittings, and other martial equipment. The very structure of trade shaped the quality of metal. Alliances between city-states could guarantee access to high-quality ores, while tariffs or blockades could force a kingdom to use inferior local materials, directly impacting the strength of its army. The standardized bronze alloys used across the Roman military, for instance, were only possible because of the empire's secure control over mines and trade routes from the copper of Cyprus to the tin of Britain. This guaranteed a consistent, reliable supply that allowed for the mass production of equipment that was uniformly excellent. What economic pressures in our own time could inspire such a profound fusion of knowledge across borders? The ancient world understood that trade routes were the circulatory system of innovation, carrying the lifeblood of new ideas to every corner of the map. This intricate global network, however, could only function within a very specific and stable environmental context, a set of natural conditions that made the entire miracle of ancient metalworking possible. A master smith's greatest secret weapon was the landscape itself. The 10th and perhaps most overlooked secret of ancient metallurgy was a profound symbiosis with the local environment, where every river, forest, and seasonal shift directly shaped the quality of the metal. A forge was not built at random. It was strategically placed where nature provided the essential ingredients for success. The most critical of these was a steady, abundant supply of fuel. Vast forests were the lifeblood of the industry, their wood transformed into the charcoal that fed the insatiable furnaces. But not all trees were equal. Dense hardwoods like oak and hickory burned hotter and longer than softwoods, creating the intense, sustained heat necessary for smelting iron. The very character of a region's steel was forged in its local timber. Water was the other indispensable partner. A clean, flowing river provided power for trip hammers and, most crucially, a reliable medium for quenching. The mineral content and temperature of the local water could alter the quenching speed, a variable a master smith had to understand intimately to avoid cracking his blades. This intimate connection meant that metallurgical centers often bloomed in specific geographic sweet spots, nestled between wooded hills and reliable waterways. In the arid climate of ancient Egypt, where timber was a precious commodity, environmental necessity sparked brilliant innovation. Egyptian furnace designs became marvels of efficiency, with thick, insulating walls and complex internal flues designed to trap every joule of heat. They could not afford to waste a single piece of charcoal, and this scarcity-driven ingenuity produced smelting technologies that were remarkably advanced for their time. Historians of the ancient environment point out that these adaptations were a direct response to the local ecology, a clear example of human technology evolving in concert with the natural world. This relationship demanded constant, intelligent adaptation. The craft was not static, it pulsed with the rhythm of the seasons. During the rainy season, smiths might shift their work to focus on tasks less dependent on dry charcoal, like refining ores or repairing tools. The long, brutal winters of Scandinavia presented a different challenge, one the Norse met with characteristic resilience. They built substantial indoor forges, often attached to their longhouses. These enclosed spaces protected the critical fire from the elements and, just as importantly, retained heat to maintain the steady, even temperatures required for delicate work like tempering a sword. The stable thermal environment of the indoor forge was not a mere convenience. It was a technological breakthrough born from environmental pressure. How does modern industry address these natural constraints? We have largely overcome them through global supply chains and artificial climate control, but at the cost of that deep, localized connection. The ancient smith had no such luxury. He had to listen to the land and adapt his craft to its every whim. The optimal setting for a forge was no accident. It was the product of generations of observation and accumulated wisdom. A slow, deliberate alignment of human ambition with the gifts and limitations of the earth. This intricate dance with the environment was so fundamental that it became woven into the very identity of the people, shaping not just their tools, but their cultural values and their understanding of their place in the natural world. That Persian ceremonial dagger was far more than a tool. It was a statement of identity, a physical prayer, and a work of art. The 11th secret of ancient metallurgy reveals how cultural values and aesthetics were not afterthoughts, but were hammered directly into the metal, enhancing a weapon's power through its profound symbolism. Across civilizations, the most revered weapons served a dual purpose. They were instruments of war, yes, but they were also canvases for a society's deepest beliefs and artistic aspirations. Art historians point to the recurring motif of the dragon, a symbol of immense power and wisdom in both Eastern and Western traditions. Engraving a dragon along the length of a blade was not mere decoration, it was an act of invocation. The smith and the warrior believed that the creature's formidable spirit would be channeled into the weapon, offering protection and ferocity in battle. Similarly, Norse axes often bore the image of Odin's ravens, Hugin and Munin, representing thought and memory. Wielding such a weapon meant carrying the wisdom and watchfulness of the god himself into the fray. This symbolic layer created a powerful psychological bond, transforming a piece of steel into a trusted companion and a sacred talisman. The balance between this ornate beauty and brutal function was a delicate art. Techniques like damascening, the intricate inlaying of precious metals like gold or silver into a steel surface, required immense skill. A master would carve fine channels into the hardened steel and then carefully hammer in the softer, contrasting metal. The result was a dazzling pattern that was also permanently locked into the weapon, unable to wear away through combat or the passage of time. This was not a superficial coating, it was a permanent fusion of art and object. Consider the magnificent bronze swords of the Mycenaean kings. Their hilts were not simple grips, they were masterpieces of craftsmanship, often overlaid with gold, ivory, or intricate niello work. These elaborate constructions were clear markers of nobility. To hold such a sword was to proclaim your status and divine right to rule. The weapon's aesthetic directly communicated the social hierarchy, its beauty underscoring the authority of the one who carried it. But does this artistry have any tangible effect on the material itself? In a fascinating way, yes, the intense focus and reverence required to execute such delicate inlay or engraving meant that the smith was operating at the peak of his concentration. This state of flow, this deep respect for the object, likely minimized errors in the entire manufacturing process. A smith patient enough to inlay a golden vine along a blade would be equally meticulous in judging its tempering colors or its hammer folds. The pursuit of beauty enforced a standard of perfection that benefited the entire object. This cultural layer added a rich human depth to the cold science of metallurgy. It answered a fundamental need to imbue objects of life and death with meaning that transcended their practical use. The weapon became a story, a lineage, a connection to the gods. This profound integration of value and material raises a pivotal question. What invisible principles of physics and chemistry were these master artisans actually harnessing, even without the formal vocabulary of modern science? An ancient smith would test a new blade not with instruments, but with his own hands, bending it to feel the precise point where it began to give. This intuitive, physical check was the essence of the 12th secret, a profound empirical understanding of material science. These masters worked without equations for tensile strength or ductility, yet they understood these properties through a lifetime of observation. They learned that a blade that bent too easily would fail in a parry, while one that did not bend at all was a single impact away from shattering. Through relentless trial and error, they discovered patterns correlating the color of the heated steel with its final flexibility, or the sound of a hammer strike with the metal's internal integrity. Historians of science note that this process of repeated experimentation, failure, and observation was a form of constant, real-world research and development. It was a science of the senses where knowledge was recorded not in textbooks but in the muscle memory and refined instincts of the craftsman. Consider the critical concept of metal fatigue. A modern engineer understands it as the progressive structural damage that occurs when a material is subjected to cyclic loading. An ancient smith understood it as the subtle weakness that appeared in a sword after it had been struck against a shield one too many times. He could not calculate the stress cycles, but he could see the faint lines forming near the hilt, and he knew to reforge the blade before it snapped. Their quality control methods were just as rigorous. A common test involved striking the finished weapon against a solid post and listening to the ring. A clear, high-pitched tone that lingered indicated a well-made, homogeneous piece of steel. A dull thud or a short, dead sound betrayed hidden flaws, internal cracks, or poor welding that would lead to catastrophic failure. This was their version of non-destructive testing, a sonic analysis perfected over generations. A brilliant case study of this empirical wisdom in action is the Roman Pilum. This was not a simple javelin, it was a masterfully engineered disposable weapon. The Romans designed its long iron shank to be made of soft, low-carbon iron. Upon impact with an enemy's shield, the soft iron tip would bend, not break. This was no manufacturing flaw, it was the entire point. A bent pilum was impossible to pull out quickly, and its weight would drag the shield down, rendering it useless and forcing the enemy to discard their primary defense. The Roman legionary did not need to understand the crystalline structure of iron to use this tool effectively, but the anonymous engineers who perfected its design absolutely understood the material property of malleability. They had empirically discovered that a certain type of iron, when worked in a specific way, would deform predictably under stress. They weaponized ductility itself. This hands-on wisdom was the bedrock of their craft. How many thousands of swords were bent, broken, and discarded before the perfect formula of ore, carbon, and heat treatment was locked into a master's mind? Their intuition was not a mystical gift but a form of compressed data. the result of observing countless outcomes and internalizing the cause and effect. This relentless, pragmatic drive for better weapons, fueled by the demands of warfare, accelerated the pace of material discovery at an astonishing rate. Every broken blade on a battlefield was a lesson, and every lesson was absorbed and passed on, forging a legacy of knowledge as resilient as the steel they created. A Roman general watches his legionaries training under the blistering sun, their chain-mail shirts heavy and hot. He knows that reducing that weight without sacrificing protection could mean the difference between a forced march and a decisive victory. This relentless pressure from the battlefield is the 13th secret, the powerful engine of military demand that forged metallurgical progress. Warfare was not just a consumer of metal goods, it was the ultimate testing ground and the most demanding client. Each new tactical development on the field created an immediate, urgent need for a material solution. The introduction of the chariot, for instance, required not just strong wheels but also lightweight, durable bronze fittings for the chariot itself and stronger, more resilient bronze for the warrior's armor and spear tips. Military historians describe this as a constant feedback loop, a deadly dance where a new weapon demanded a new defense, which in turn spurred the creation of an even deadlier weapon. The evolution of the shield is a perfect example. Early hide-covered shields were sufficient against glancing blows, but the rise of powerful, focused thrusts from spears and early swords created a demand for puncture resistance. This led to the reinforcement of shields with bronze bosses and rims, and eventually to the full metal hoplon shield of the Greek phalanx, a technological marvel that itself dictated a specific style of close formation combat. The quest for a sharper, more durable blade was equally relentless. A sword that could not cleave through an enemy's leather armor or wooden shield was useless. This demand pushed smiths to experiment with higher carbon steels and more complex quenching techniques, all in pursuit of that perfect, unyielding edge that could survive the chaos of a prolonged melee. In medieval Europe, the crossbow presented a terrifying new challenge. Its steel-tipped bolt could punch through most mail with ease. The response was the development of laminated plate armor. Smiths learned to forge individual plates of hardened steel, carefully shaped to deflect blows and distributed across the body to manage weight. The finest suits were proofed, tested by firing a crossbow bolt at a stationary piece to leave a dent, a visible mark of quality that assured the knight of his survival. Every battle was a live fire test. Broken swords, dented helms, and pierced shields were not just discarded, they were studied. A shattered blade told a story of a poor temper, while a bent one spoke of insufficient carbon. This brutal, real-world data was fed directly back to the workshops, informing the next generation of designs. What modern conflicts focused on electronics and composites could learn from this ancient, hands-on cycle of material innovation? The relentless drive for military supremacy pushed the limits of human ingenuity, but this crucible of creation came at a steep and often hidden cost to the very people who worked the forges. The rhythmic pounding of a hammer was a sound bought at a price. For all their mastery over fire and metal, ancient smiths faced invisible dangers with every breath they took. This 14th secret reveals their sophisticated, often life-saving health and safety practices, a testament to an early awareness of occupational hazards. Inside a typical workshop, the air swam with metallic dust and toxic fumes from lead and arsenic used in alloys. Without this understanding, a master smith could see his life cut short by lung ailments or neurological damage. Medical historians point to writings from the Greek physician Hippocrates, who described the severe colic and paralysis suffered by miners and metalworkers, clearly linking their symptoms to their trade. This was not ignored. Smiths developed practical, effective countermeasures. They wore thick leather aprons and gloves to shield themselves from sparks and molten splatter. Herbal remedies for burns were standard knowledge, with poultices made from plantain or aloe vera kept close at hand to treat the inevitable injuries from their work. The very design of their workspaces reflected a concern for safety. Forges were often spaced well apart to prevent a cascade of accidents, and ventilation was a primary consideration. In larger Roman workshops, we find evidence of cleverly designed ventilation shafts and high ceilings that used the natural rise of heat to draw fumes and smoke away from the craftsman's breathing zone. In ancient China, smiths working with fine metal dusts are recorded as using simple masks made of layered cloth, soaked in water, to filter the dangerous particles from the air they inhaled. This was a crude but conscious effort at respiratory protection. Beyond the physical tools, a robust community support system was their ultimate safety net. Knowledge of first aid was shared among guild members, and an injured smith could rely on his brothers for support until he could work again. This ensured that an individual's misfortune did not spell the end of his family's livelihood. How do these ancient precautions stand against today's standards? In principle, they are remarkably aligned, identifying hazards and implementing controls, from personal protective equipment to environmental ventilation. Their methods were born of stark, lived experience, a direct response to the suffering they witnessed. This conscious prioritization of well-being was not a separate concern. It was integral to the craft's very survival. By protecting the smith, they protected the knowledge he carried, ensuring that the flame of mastery could be passed, undimmed, to the next generation. This legacy of careful preservation makes the eventual loss of their greatest secrets all the more puzzling, pointing toward a final, overarching mystery that still captivates us today. The shimmering patterns on a Damascus blade are not just beautiful, they are a ghost. They are the visible echo of a production method that vanished from the world, leaving behind a mystery that torments modern science. This is the 15th and perhaps most famous secret, the enigma of true Damascus steel. The core of the puzzle lies in its raw material, an ingot of Wootz steel from specific mines in southern India. When the supply of these unique ingots dried up in the 18th century, the knowledge of how to forge them into legendary blades died with it. We know the result was a steel containing carbon nanotubes, structures so advanced we only confirmed their presence with electron microscopes. These tiny, super-strong tubes within the metal matrix are what gave the blades their legendary sharpness and resilience, a form of nanotechnology achieved 1,000 years ago. Modern metallurgists express a profound frustration, sifting through incomplete records and contradictory accounts. They know what the steel contains, but not the precise, repeatable steps to create it. Was it the trace elements of vanadium in the original Indian ore? Was it the specific type of carbon derived from rare leaves or woods used in the sealed crucible smelting process? Or was it the meticulously controlled cooling rate, a slow descent over days that allowed the crystalline structure to form in this unique, miraculous way? The theories are numerous, but the replication remains elusive. Consider the case of 19th-century European scientists who acquired original Wootz ingots and tried with all their industrial might to recreate the Damascus pattern. They failed. Their blades, while functional, lacked the otherworldly combination of hardness and flexibility. They could not unlock the secret of the thermal cycling, the specific hammering rhythm, or the final heat treatment that transformed a lump of high-carbon steel into a blade that could reportedly slice a falling silk scarf in midair and withstand the shock of striking a metal shield. The loss was not merely of a recipe, but of an entire ecosystem of knowledge, from the miner who knew which vein of ore to tap, to the smelter who understood the exact song of the furnace, to the forger who could read the colors of the metal like a map. What forgotten manuscript, buried in some library, holds the one key detail we have overlooked? The ghost in the steel reminds us that the most sophisticated knowledge can be incredibly fragile, vanishing when the chain of apprenticeship is broken. This profound loss sets the stage for another, even more monumental disappearance, the secret that built an empire to last 1,000 years. Even as Damascus steel faded into legend, another terrifying secret emerged from the forge, one that harnessed fire itself. The Byzantines possessed a weapon so devastating it could decide the fate of empires, a liquid flame that clung to ships and water alike. They called it Greek fire, and its true composition was a state secret guarded as fiercely as any crown jewel. Historical accounts from besieged armies describe a horror that water could not extinguish, a fire that seemed to chase their ships across the waves. The base was almost certainly a form of crude petroleum. A natural naphtha drawn from surface seeps in the region, but petroleum alone does not explain its legendary adhesive quality or its intense, persistent burn. This is where metallurgy enters the story, not to create a blade but to forge a storm. Chemists analyzing ancient texts suggest that the true power of Greek fire came from a mixture of chemistry and metalworking. The most plausible theory involves the addition of quicklime, a compound that heats spontaneously when it contacts water. This would explain why the flames seem to ignite on impact with the sea, and why dousing the fire with water only made it rage more fiercely. But to make this volatile mixture stable enough to store and project through bronze siphons onto enemy ships, powdered metals were likely the key. Finely ground copper or iron filings could have acted as a stabilizer, preventing the ingredients from separating during storage aboard a rocking warship. More than just a thickener, these metals would have become part of the inferno itself. When sprayed into the heart of the fire, copper compounds are known to produce a brilliant green-blue flame, a terrifying spectacle that would have seemed like sorcery to those facing it. We see this same principle in modern fireworks, where specific metals are added to create dazzling colors. In Greek fire, the copper would not only have colored the flames but potentially intensified the heat, turning the entire conflagration into a metallurgical furnace on the water. Could other metals have played a role? Some hypotheses point to saltpeter, but that leads toward gunpowder, a different path entirely. The genius of Greek fire was its self-contained reaction, a chemistry set of destruction that used its own environment, even the water intended to save its victims, as fuel. So how close are we to truly rediscovering it? Modern laboratories can create substances that mimic its described behavior, but without an original recipe, we cannot be certain we have matched the exact, horrifying blend. The secret died with the Byzantine Empire, a final testament to their mastery over the elements. This fusion of chemical knowledge and metallurgical skill did not exist in a vacuum. It was part of a broader ancient understanding that materials could be engineered for specific, world-changing purposes, a philosophy that found its ultimate expression in the most enduring construction the world has ever known. While the Byzantines wielded liquid fire, the Romans built to outlast time itself. Their concrete was not the brittle material we know today, but a living stone that seemed to grow stronger with age. This 17th mystery lies in the lost art of Roman concrete, a recipe that may have harnessed metallic secrets to create structures that have endured for 2 millennia. The core ingredients are famously known as lime, water, and a special volcanic ash called pozzolana, sourced from specific deposits around the Bay of Naples. But recent archaeological analysis suggests a more complex formula. Thin sections of ancient Roman concrete, examined under powerful microscopes, reveal the presence of tiny, scattered metal shavings, likely iron filings, throughout the matrix. These were not accidental contaminants. One leading archaeologist notes that samples from maritime structures show an almost supernatural resistance to the pounding of saltwater and waves, a durability that modern Portland cement cannot match. The metal inclusions appear to have played a critical role in a slow geochemical process. When tiny cracks eventually form from centuries of stress, water seeps in. This water reacts with the embedded iron particles, causing them to rust. Now, rust is typically a destructive force, but here it was engineered to be a savior. The expanding rust effectively seals the microcrack from within, a self-healing mechanism that continually maintains the structural integrity. This is a form of passive, perpetual maintenance built right into the material. The Pantheon's majestic dome stands as the ultimate testament to this technology. It is a single, massive cast of this concrete, spanning over 140 feet without any internal reinforcement. It has withstood earthquakes, invasions, and the elements for nearly 2,000 years, its integrity unbroken. The concrete used in its upper layers was even lighter and more porous than the foundation, a deliberate gradation of material properties that precisely managed the structure's weight and stress distribution. This was not simple construction, it was material science of the highest order. Could our own modern infrastructure, plagued by crumbling bridges and decaying roads, learn from this ancient wisdom? We are only now beginning to understand the complex, long-term chemical reactions that these Roman engineers mastered through empirical observation. They treated their concrete as a dynamic system, not a static product. This architectural marvel perfectly bridges the worlds of metallurgy and civil engineering, proving that the ancients saw no divide between the secrets of metal and the soul of stone. This same spirit of material mastery flourished independently in the East, where smiths discovered a way to fold the very essence of the earth into their steel. A world away from Roman concrete, another civilization was mastering metal on a scale that defies belief. The colossal Humuwu Ding, a bronze cauldron from ancient China, weighs over 1,800 pounds, a testament to a casting technology so advanced its full secrets remain just out of reach. This is the 18th mystery, the vanished techniques of Chinese bronze casting. While the Romans perfected durable alloys, the Shang dynasty artisans were the undisputed masters of form and detail, creating intricate vessels covered in spiraling Tauti masks and dragon motifs with a precision that seems impossible for their time. Their method was not the lost wax casting used elsewhere, but a uniquely complex system known as piece mold casting. The process began with a full model of the vessel, sculpted from clay. This model was then carefully covered in a layer of clay to create a negative mold, which was cut into multiple sections and removed. These sections were fired into durable terracotta pieces and then reassembled around a clay core, leaving a precise gap between the core and the outer mold walls. This gap was where the molten bronze would eventually flow, but the true genius lay in the details. To prevent catastrophic air bubbles, the molds featured ingenious hidden venting systems, tiny channels that allowed gases to escape as the liquid metal filled the cavity. The alloys themselves were a carefully guarded science. The classic recipe was a blend of copper, tin, and lead, but the ratios were everything. Different vessels required different mixtures, a higher tin content for a bell that needed a clear, resonant ring, or a specific amount of lead to make the molten metal more fluid, allowing it to capture the finest details of the mold without cracking. Art historians studying the inscriptions cast into these bronzes have noticed something fascinating. They often refer to auspicious days and specific stars, suggesting that the actual pouring of the metal was a ritual act timed to celestial events. This was not superstition, it was a form of quality control. Waiting for a cool, dry night, for instance, could prevent the clay mold from absorbing atmospheric moisture that would turn to steam and ruin the cast. The cultural practice of ancestor worship safeguarded these industrial secrets. The casting of a great ritual vessel for a royal temple was a state affair, overseen by a closed guild of artisans whose knowledge was passed from father to son. To reveal the secrets of the mold or the alloy was not just a betrayal of the craft, it was a sacrilege against the ancestors who would receive the vessel. This sacred context ensured that the knowledge remained pure and uncompromised for centuries. How did such a monumental technology, capable of producing the Humuwu Ding, simply fade from common practice? The rise of iron and the fall of dynasties shifted priorities, and the deeply specialized, ritual-bound nature of the craft may have made it too fragile to survive societal collapse. This Eastern mastery of intricate casting perfectly complements the Western prowess in steel forging, two sides of the same global coin, each asking us what else we have forgotten in the relentless march of time. A glint of metal from an ancient artifact can rewrite history. Deep within museum collections lie objects from the pre-Columbian Americas and ancient Egypt that contain a startling anomaly: microscopic traces of titanium. This metal was not officially discovered until 1791, yet it appears in alloys forged millennia earlier. How could such a thing be possible? Materials scientists point to a fascinating natural occurrence. Certain iron sands, used as a source of ore in various parts of the world, are naturally rich in a mineral called ilmenite, which contains both iron and titanium. When ancient smiths smelted these particular sands in their bloomery furnaces, they were unknowingly creating an alloy. The intense heat and specific reducing atmosphere, rich in carbon monoxide from the charcoal, could have partially reduced the titanium oxide present in the ore, allowing tiny amounts of elemental titanium to dissolve into the iron bloom. This was not a deliberate recipe, but a fortunate accident of geography and process. The resulting metal would have possessed subtle but valuable advantages. Titanium is renowned for its exceptional strength-to-weight ratio and its profound resistance to corrosion. An artifact made from such an alloy would be noticeably lighter and more resilient to the elements than one made from pure iron or common steel. This might explain the legendary durability of certain ceremonial objects that have survived in remarkable condition. One compelling example comes not from the Americas, but from ancient Egypt. Analysis of a piece of royal jewelry revealed an unexpected composition: a gold alloy containing traces of platinum group metals. These metals have extremely high melting points, far beyond the typical capabilities of ancient Egyptian furnaces. The most plausible explanation is that the goldsmiths were using alluvial gold, panned from river sands that naturally contain tiny, durable nuggets of platinum. Without the means to melt these specks separately, they simply hammered and worked them into the gold, creating a composite material that was, by accident, far more advanced than anyone could have understood. These are not isolated incidents. They represent a pattern of accidental material science where ancient craftsmen, through sheer empirical experimentation and a deep connection to their local resources, stumbled upon formulas that we would consider modern. Their genius lay in recognizing a good result when they saw it, even if they did not know the precise chemistry behind it. They knew that metal from a certain riverbed produced a lighter, shinier, and longer-lasting product, so they returned to that source again and again, reinforcing the success without comprehending the atomic-level cause. Does this continuous thread of accidental discovery force us to reconsider the very arc of innovation? Our linear timeline of progress from primitive to advanced begins to blur. It suggests that humanity has been flirting with advanced materials for thousands of years, catching glimpses of their potential through a combination of keen observation and serendipitous access to the Earth's rare treasures. This raises a profound question about the nature of their knowledge, a knowledge built not on theory, but on a deep, almost spiritual connection to the materials they worked with. A failed batch of metal was not always a disaster. Sometimes it was a discovery. The 20th secret of ancient metallurgy is the profound role of serendipity, the unplanned, happy accidents that yielded breakthroughs no one could have intentionally designed. Innovation often arrived not through careful planning, but through a fortunate mistake, a contaminated ore, or a furnace that burned a little too hot with a very specific fuel. Consider the monumental shift from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age. The first steel was likely born from such an accident when an early smith, perhaps in a region rich in charcoal, noticed that iron left in a charcoal fire for too long absorbed carbon from the fuel, emerging not as soft, malleable iron, but as a much harder, sharper material. This was steel, a transformative discovery born from a simple error in timing. Innovation theorists point to this kind of unstructured experimentation as a vital engine of creativity in the ancient world. Without rigid scientific doctrines, artisans were free to try seemingly irrational combinations, their workshops becoming laboratories where failure was just another day to point on the path to a revelation. The creation of brass provides another brilliant example. Long before anyone understood zinc as a separate metal, early metalworkers smelting copper from certain ores found that it sometimes produced a beautiful, gold-like metal. They had unknowingly used an ore that contained both copper and zinc, creating brass through a completely serendipitous mixing. This accidental alloy was prized for its decorative appeal and its different working properties, and once the desirable result was observed, smiths would have sought to replicate the conditions that created it, slowly turning chance into a repeatable process. This pattern of observation and replication is key. Societies did not let these lucky events fade. They documented them through oral tradition and practical demonstration, building an entire body of knowledge upon a foundation of fortunate mistakes. A stunning example comes from the pre-Columbian Andes, where artisans were working with platinum centuries before it was officially recognized in Europe. Platinum has an astoundingly high melting point, one far beyond the capabilities of their ancient furnaces. So how did they craft it into jewelry? They likely discovered, perhaps by accidentally mixing alluvial platinum dust with gold dust in a crucible, that if they heated the mixture in a very hot charcoal fire, the tiny platinum particles would not melt, but they would sinter. This process involves the particles fusing together at their boundaries without becoming a liquid, creating a solid, durable composite material. This technique of sintering platinum with gold may have been entirely unintentional at first, but its result was so valuable that it became a preserved and refined craft. How can we, in our era of highly controlled and predictable research, cultivate such happy accidents? Our modern processes often seek to eliminate the very variables and unexpected outcomes that fueled ancient innovation. The unpredictable spark of serendipity enriched the craft immeasurably, proving that not all knowledge was deliberately sought. Sometimes, the greatest secrets revealed themselves to those who were simply paying close attention. This constant, churning cycle of trial, error, and observation propelled metallurgy forward for millennia, yet it could not forever protect these hard-won secrets from the tides of history. The final, most chilling secret is not one of creation, but of silence. The most advanced metallurgical knowledge did not always fade slowly. It was often extinguished in a single generation by the fires of societal collapse. When the Roman Empire fractured, its intricate network of specialized workshops and trade routes shattered with it. The guilds that had meticulously preserved the recipes for Noric steel or the secrets of concrete production disbanded, their masters scattered, their apprentices left without teachers. This was not a mere pause, it was a profound amnesia. Historians of technology describe this phenomenon as a severing of the chain where complex, hands-on knowledge, stored only in living memory, vanishes when the social structures that support it disintegrate. The legendary production of true Damascus steel, for instance, did not end because the recipe was bad, but because the Mongol invasions of the 13th century destroyed the trade routes that supplied the unique Indian Wootz ingots and disrupted the stable urban centers where the master smiths practiced their art. The destruction of Baghdad's House of Wisdom in 1258 was a catastrophe for more than just philosophy. It was a library of practical knowledge going up in smoke, incinerating manuscripts that may have held clues to techniques we are still trying to reconstruct. Skilled artisans became refugees, their expertise a burden in a world where survival was the only craft. They migrated, but without the supporting infrastructure of a patron, a steady supply of specific ores, and a community of peers, their knowledge could not be fully transferred. It diluted, adapted to cruder local materials, and eventually faded into half-remembered legend. Look further back to the catastrophic Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE. This was a systems failure that brought the entire Eastern Mediterranean to its knees. Palaces burned, international trade in tin and copper ground to a halt, and literacy itself disappeared in many regions. The sophisticated alloy formulas for bronze, which required precise ratios of copper and tin from sources often thousands of miles apart, became impossible to maintain. Societies were thrown back on local resources, forced to rediscover metalworking from a much more primitive starting point. This historical pattern forces a difficult question upon us. In our own increasingly specialized and interconnected world, how fragile is the expertise we take for granted? Our digital records are vulnerable to decay and obsolescence, and our complex supply chains are susceptible to disruption. The loss of ancient metallurgy teaches us that knowledge is not a permanent possession, but a flame that must be continuously fed by a stable, dedicated society. It is a stark reminder that our technological inheritance is a gift, one that requires active stewardship to prevent it from slipping back into the silent earth, waiting for some future age to puzzle over our own lost wonders. This very fragility, however, has ignited a passionate modern quest to reclaim what was lost, a journey that takes us from university laboratories to the forges of dedicated traditionalists. A pristine laboratory replaces the smoky forge, its silence broken by the hum of machines. Here, materials scientists are not relying on ancient recipes, but peering directly into the heart of the steel itself. They use electron microscopes to map the atomic landscapes of legendary blades, revealing the carbon nanotubes and intricate carbide bands that give Damascus steel its legendary strength. This is the 22nd secret, the modern scientific crusade to reclaim what was lost. Researchers are not just copying, they are reverse engineering history. They employ techniques like spectroscopy, which acts as a chemical fingerprint reader, identifying trace elements in ancient artifacts down to parts per million. These minuscule amounts of vanadium or nickel, once the intuitive secret of a master smith, are now quantified and modeled in powerful computers. Computational simulations allow engineers to test thousands of virtual alloy combinations and heat treatment cycles, compressing centuries of trial and error into days of processing. One of the most promising frontiers is experimental archaeology, where historians and scientists collaborate to build and operate exact replicas of ancient furnaces and tools. They smelt iron using bloomeries constructed from period-accurate materials, meticulously recording every variable from airflow to charcoal type. In one landmark project, a team achieved a major breakthrough by successfully recreating the watery pattern of Wootz steel. Their key was not a mysterious ingredient, but an unprecedented level of control over the cooling process. They discovered that by holding the steel at a specific subcritical temperature for a precisely defined period, sometimes for days, they could coax the carbon within to form the desired crystalline structure. This slow, deliberate dance of heat mimics the conditions a master might have achieved through intuition alone. The tools of investigation are equally advanced. Three-dimensional printing allows for the creation of perfect replicas of fragile ancient crucibles or tire nozzles, testing how their design influenced furnace atmospheres. Other teams have focused on the Roman concrete mystery, mixing modern cement with volcanic ash and seawater, then observing as the long-term chemical reactions create the same self-healing crystals found in ancient samples. Their success is partial but profound, producing a material far more durable than standard concrete, though not yet matching the 2,000-year resilience of the original. So how close are we to a full restoration of these arts? We can replicate the appearance and some properties, but the true, holistic mastery remains elusive. We can make a blade that looks like Damascus steel, but can it survive the same brutal combat tests? We can create a concrete that heals its own cracks, but will it stand for millennia? The gap lies in the intangible, the accumulated wisdom of a lifetime at the forge, the feel of the hammer, and the deep cultural connection to the material. These modern quests do more than satisfy historical curiosity. They push the boundaries of contemporary materials science, inspiring new alloys and sustainable building techniques. But this powerful ability to resurrect lost knowledge forces a critical question, one that echoes from the silent forges of the past. Now that we hold the power to potentially rebuild these ancient wonders, where does the line fall between rediscovery and recklessness? A modern laboratory can resurrect a metal, but who holds the right to awaken its spirit? This is the 23rd secret, the profound ethical and cultural dilemma that arises when we attempt to revive these lost arts. The quest is no longer just a scientific challenge. It has become a deeply human one, forcing us to confront questions of ownership, respect, and the potential consequences of our curiosity. Imagine a team of archaeologists and metallurgists eager to reconstruct a sacred alloy used for generations by an indigenous community. Their scientific enthusiasm meets a sobering reality. The living descendants of the original smiths view this knowledge not as a data set, but as a sacred trust, a core part of their cultural identity and spiritual practice. Ethicists specializing in cultural heritage point to a critical distinction here: the difference between preservation and appropriation. Preservation is a collaborative effort that centers the voices and authority of the descendant communities, ensuring they guide the process and benefit from the outcomes. Appropriation, however, occurs when external researchers extract this knowledge without permission, replicating sacred objects or rituals for academic or commercial gain, effectively severing the practice from its living cultural heart. This demands new frameworks for research, built on principles of prior and informed consent. This means that before any study begins, researchers must engage in a genuine, inclusive dialogue with community elders and knowledge keepers, clearly explaining their goals and jointly deciding how to proceed. A powerful example comes from the revival of Great Lakes Native American copper working. For centuries, these communities hammered pure copper into ceremonial objects. Modern efforts to revive this craft have been most successful when led by the tribes themselves, often in partnership with historians and scientists who take a supportive, not leading, role. These projects empower the community by reconnecting youth with ancestral skills, strengthening cultural pride, and sometimes even creating new economic opportunities through the sale of authentic artwork. The benefits are shared, and the traditions are honored because the community itself holds the pen that writes this chapter of its own history. Beyond cultural respect lies another grave consideration: the potential misuse of weapon technologies. Unlocking the formula for a blade that never dulls or a shield that cannot be pierced is not merely a historical exercise. It has direct and alarming applications in modern warfare. The same principles that made a Roman gladius so effective could be applied to today's combat knives or armored vehicles, raising a stark moral question. Does the pursuit of knowledge obligate us to consider its destructive potential? Some argue that certain secrets, especially those tied intimately to sacred rites or capable of significant harm, might be better left in the past, their burial an act of wisdom rather than failure. This moral layer adds a necessary complexity to our technological ambition, reminding us that our ability to recreate a thing does not always grant us the wisdom to wield it. The forge of the future must be guided by an ethical compass as refined as the metals it seeks to master. The ghost of a Roman sword could hold the key to our future in the stars. This is the 24th secret, the stunning potential for these ancient metallurgical discoveries to revolutionize modern industry. The same principles that gave a Damascus blade its flexibility are now being studied by aerospace engineers. They are designing new alloys for spacecraft and aircraft that must withstand extreme temperatures and violent stresses, inspired by the nanoscale structures found in ancient Wootz steel. The goal is to create materials that are incredibly light yet impossibly strong, just as the master smiths of antiquity once did. One leading materials scientist at a major research institute explains that the corrosion-resistant coatings developed by the Celts and others, using plant-based compounds, offer a blueprint for green alternatives to modern, often toxic, anti-rust treatments. Imagine bridges and ships protected by a biodegradable shield derived from ancient recipes, drastically reducing maintenance and environmental harm. In the field of medicine, the concept is equally transformative. The layered composite nature of a Viking sword designed to stop cracks from spreading is inspiring new designs for bone implants. These implants could mimic that internal architecture, creating a stronger bond with human bone and lasting a lifetime within the body. Even the humble cutting tool is being reborn. Industrial drill bits and surgical scalpels are now being engineered with microscopic patterns inspired by Damascus steel, granting them a sharper, longer-lasting edge that reduces waste and improves precision. This approach is a form of technological biomimicry, but instead of copying nature, we are copying the brilliance of our ancestors. Perhaps the most profound application lies in green metallurgy. The Roman concrete formula, with its self-healing properties, promises a construction revolution. Modern cement production is a massive source of global carbon emissions. By replicating the Roman method, we could create concrete that not only lasts for millennia but also sequesters carbon dioxide over its long lifetime, turning our infrastructure into a carbon sink. What other sustainable practices did these ancient artisans unknowingly master? Their deep, localized use of resources and their efficient, closed-loop systems offer a powerful model for reducing the environmental footprint of modern manufacturing. This is not mere nostalgia, it is a practical partnership across time. The fusion of this ancestral wisdom with cutting-edge science promises a new era of durable, sustainable, and intelligent materials. Each of us lives in a world built by these ancient secrets, from the steel in our cars to the concrete in our foundations. What forgotten innovation from your own hometown's history might be waiting for its rediscovery, ready to solve a modern problem we thought was new. Your hands would feel the weight of history in a perfectly balanced replica sword. This connection to the master smiths of antiquity is more than a fascination with objects. It is a bridge to a way of thinking, the 25th secret of ancient metallurgy. These artisans left behind not just weapons, but a profound philosophical legacy built on patience, craftsmanship, and a deep humility before the complexities of the natural world. The ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle wrote of the relationship between form and matter, how a thing's potential is unlocked by the purpose given to it by a creator. The smith did not see a lump of ore, he saw the potential for a perfect blade waiting within the stone. His work was a collaboration with the material, a dialogue of fire and hammer that respected the metal's inherent nature. This process demanded a patience that is almost foreign to our modern world. A single sword could represent months of dedicated labor, each fold of the steel, each cycle of heating and cooling, a deliberate step in a slow dance toward perfection. There was no shortcut to quality, no way to rush the transformation of raw earth into a refined tool. This reverence for the journey itself is a lesson we can carry into our own lives. The simple joy of manual creation, of building or fixing something with your own hands, offers a tangible satisfaction that digital realms cannot replicate. It roots us in a reality of cause and effect, connecting us to the countless generations who shaped their world through skill and effort. The Japanese art of kintsugi provides a beautiful parallel. When a ceramic pot breaks, it is repaired with lacquer mixed with gold, silver, or platinum. Rather than hiding the damage, kintsugi highlights it, treating the breaks and repairs as part of the object's unique history, making it more beautiful for having been broken. This philosophy mirrors the ideals of the master smith, who understood that the stresses and imperfections within the metal were not flaws to be hidden, but characteristics to be understood and mastered, ultimately contributing to the weapon's unique strength and identity. At its core, this entire journey through lost secrets is a testament to the fragility and importance of preserving knowledge. The meticulous skills of the smith were not stored in books, but in the muscles and memories of people. When that chain of mentorship was broken, the light of understanding was extinguished for 1,000 years. This forces a deeply personal reflection. How do the choices in your own life reflect the values of patience and craftsmanship? What knowledge, whether from your family, your culture, or your own hard-won experience, are you responsible for preserving and passing on? The silent, enduring steel of an ancient blade asks us what we are building with our own time that will truly last. A legendary sword was not born from one secret, but from a perfect storm of them. Think of it as a tapestry where threads of geology, chemistry, economics, and belief are woven together into a single, unbreakable strand. The true miracle of ancient metallurgy was not any individual technique, but the seamless integration of all 25 secrets we have explored. A master smith was more than a technician, he was a systems thinker. He understood that the quality of his ore, the design of his furnace, the rhythm of his hammer, and even the prayers he whispered were all interconnected parts of a single process. Systems theorists point to this as a classic example of emergent complexity, where the whole becomes infinitely greater than the sum of its parts. The legendary strength of a Damascus blade, for instance, cannot be replicated by simply copying its chemical formula. It required the specific Indian ore with its trace elements, the crucible smelting process that created the unique crystalline structure, the master forger who knew how to unlock the pattern through heat and hammer, and the vast trade network that delivered the raw ingot to his workshop. Remove any one thread, and the entire tapestry unravels. This holistic view reveals powerful feedback loops that drove progress. military demand for better weapons created economic incentives, funding specialized forges where smiths could experiment. A successful new alloy would then shift battlefield tactics, which in turn created a new demand for an even better defensive material, like laminated plate armor. Society and technology were in a constant, dynamic dance. The spiritual dimension was not separate from this system. It was a vital component of its resilience. The rituals and rites performed at the forge were a form of quality control for the mind, fostering the intense focus and patience necessary to execute dozens of precise, unforgiving steps. This fusion of empirical testing and sacred belief created a robust knowledge ecosystem where the smith's unwavering concentration was as crucial as the carbon content of his steel. What can our own specialized world learn from this ancient, integrated model? Our modern approach often isolates disciplines, with chemists, engineers, and historians working in separate silos. The ancient masters remind us that breakthrough innovation often lives in the spaces between fields, in the subtle interplay of material, mind, and culture. The indestructible weapons of antiquity stand as a testament to a forgotten way of knowing, one that saw the world not as a collection of separate problems, but as a single, interconnected mystery waiting to be solved. The true legacy of these lost arts is not merely a collection of techniques, but a testament to a forgotten way of knowing. We have traveled from the rhythmic hammer of the first alloy makers to the quiet hum of modern laboratories, uncovering a world where precise chemistry, environmental wisdom, and sacred ritual were threads in a single, unbreakable cord. The indestructible weapons of antiquity were not born from a single secret, but from the perfect storm of interconnected forces. Economic demand fueled the fires of innovation, environmental constraints sparked brilliant adaptation, and cultural values imbued the metal with a soul that transcended its physical form. These blades and shields did more than shape the outcome of battles. They shaped the very course of human history. The lessons they offer us today are profound. They call us to value deep craftsmanship over hasty production, to see the wisdom in sustainable, localized practices, and to recognize our solemn duty as stewards of knowledge. A historian once observed that in every forgotten art lies a seed for future growth. This could not be more true. The quest to understand these ancient masters is pushing the boundaries of modern materials science, inspiring greener construction and more resilient technologies. It reminds us that the greatest innovations often emerge from a respectful dialogue with the past. We now pass this story to you. Which of these 25 secrets resonated most deeply with your own curiosity? Was it the sacred rituals of the forge, the accidental discovery of titanium, or the haunting mystery of Greek fire? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this journey into the mysteries of history has captivated you, subscribe to continue exploring the forgotten wonders of our world. Let us carry forward the spirit of the master smith, blending curiosity with respect to ensure these stories of human ingenuity endure for generations to